I was 23 the night I learned that some people carry whole wars under their skin, and you'd never know it unless one of them happened to walk into the same room as you. I'd been in the army 19 months by then. 19 months and exactly zero combat, which is the thing nobody warns you about when you sign the papers all fired up at 18. They show you the recruiting videos with the helicopters and the mud and the brotherhood, and then you get there and most of soldiering turns out to be folding chairs, waxing floors, standing in lines, waiting for something to happen that mostly doesn't. I'd waxed more floors than I'd ever fired rounds, and I'd fired plenty of rounds. That winter I got stuck on what we called event detail. It's a polite name for the soldiers who set up tables. The big event that February was the dedication of the new Hartley Wing at the Fort Caldwell Veterans Medical Center, a whole new building, 3 stories of glass and brick, built specifically for burn recovery and limb rehabilitation. It was a big deal. Generals were coming, state senators, reporters with the good cameras, the kind that cost more than my truck. There was even a brass band, 8 or 9 kids from the regimental music unit, who practiced the same handful of bars over and over in the corner until I could have hummed their tune in my sleep. Da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. I still hear it sometimes. So picture me at 4 o'clock that afternoon, in my fatigues with the sleeves rolled, hauling these heavy steel coffee urns 2 at a time across a floor so freshly polished I could see the ceiling lights in it. And that's where I first really looked at her. She worked in the kitchen, catering side, but the permanent kind. She wasn't one of the contract kids bussed in for the event. She belonged there. She poured the coffee, refilled the cream, kept the long tables wiped down with a gray rag she kept tucked into her apron string. Older than me. Late 40s maybe, though it was hard to put a number on her. Short hair, gray coming in at the temples, the kind of hair you cut yourself in a mirror because you've got better things to spend money on. She had quick hands and a quiet way of moving, like she'd learned a long time ago how to take up less space than she was owed. And then there were the scars. I'm not going to pretend they weren't the first thing I saw. They had to be. The whole left side of her face was rippled and shiny and pulled tight, the way burned skin gets when it heals, like candle wax that cooled at the wrong angle. The corner of her mouth tugged a little downward on that side. Her left ear was mostly gone, just a smooth curl of scar where an ear used to be. And the hand she poured with her left was missing 2 fingers down past the second knuckle, and what was left of it was that same melted red end white, the skin too smooth in some places and ridged in others. Where her sleeve rode up I could see it climbed her forearm too, disappearing under the fabric, and you got the sick, sure feeling that it kept going. But here's the thing, she poured perfect, even with that hand. She'd set a cup down on a saucer without a single drop spilling, every time like a magic trick she was too tired to be proud of. The catering crew, the young ones, weren't kind about her. I'd love to tell you I was the exception. I wasn't. I just stayed quiet, which I've since learned is its own brand of cruelty, the kind that thinks it's clean because it didn't say the words out loud. There was a kid named Tavar, loud, the sort who needs an audience to feel real. He was leaning against the dessert cart with 2 of the contract servers when he saw her go by with a tray. "Bet she fell in a deep fryer," he said, just loud enough. "Imagine serving the general looking like that. They ought to keep her in the back." A girl next to him, I never got her name, blonde ponytail, gum, laughed behind her hand. "It's a dedication, not a haunted house," she said, and Tavar nearly fell over himself. He thought that was so funny. And here's what I noticed, the small thing that stuck a hook in me even before I knew the rest. The woman's good hand stopped, just for half a second, resting on the lip of the urn she was about to lift. She'd heard it. She had to have. You don't go through life with a face like that and not develop an ear for the things people whisper about you. But she didn't turn around. She didn't snap, didn't flinch, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She just topped off the cream pitcher, wiped the spout clean with that gray rag, and moved to the next table like the words had passed right through her body without touching anything. And God help me, I thought she was embarrassed. I thought she was ashamed and had nothing to say back. I thought, the way a dumb 23-year-old thinks who's never had anything taken from him, that her silence was weakness. I was so wrong about that woman that it still puts heat in my face all these years later. By 5:30, the brass started rolling in, and the whole feel of the building changed. Colonels in dress blues, a couple of state senators with their handlers, a man from the governor's office who I swear kept checking his own reflection in the dark windows, fixing his tie, practicing some expression he wanted to have. The band found its 8 bars again, and somebody dimmed the lights, then brought them back up, then dimmed them again because nobody could agree on the mood. My sergeant, a barrel-chested man named Okonkwo, who could fill a doorway and had a voice like a furnace door slamming, grabbed me by the shoulder and steered me toward the main entrance. "Prout, doors. You stand here, you stand straight, you say, 'Good evening, sir,' and 'Good evening, ma'am.' And you do not say one single other word unless somebody asks you a direct question. Understand me?" "Understood, Sergeant." "This is a no-screw-up night, Prout. General Hartley funds half this fort out of his own pocket. You will not be the reason I hear about anything tomorrow." "You won't, Sergeant." He looked at me a second longer than he needed to, the way sergeants do, deciding whether to believe you. Then he was gone, off to terrorize somebody else, and I had the best seat in the house without even knowing it yet. The guest of honor came through my doors at about 5:45. General Royce Hartley, retired, but you don't really lose 3 stars, they stay welded to you, and the building had his name carved over the entrance because he put up half the money himself, and then by all accounts embarrassed Congress into coughing up the rest. He was older than I expected, 70, maybe more, tall but gone thin and slightly stooped the way old soldiers go, like the body finally set down a weight it had carried for decades. His face was lined deep, a folded map of a face. But his eyes were sharp and they moved over everything, and when he came through the door the whole room seemed to straighten up. Even the senators, even the man from the governor's office stopped fixing his tie. He started working the line of people just inside, shaking hands, and he had that gift, the real kind, not the fake politician kind, of making each person feel like the only one in the room. He got to me at the door, glanced at the name tape on my chest and stuck out his hand. "Prout," he said, "holding the line at the door, son." "Yes, sir." "Good man, somebody's got to." And he smiled, a real one, and shook my hand with a grip that was still strong and moved on, and I about floated 3 feet off that polished floor. He'd said my name. The general had said my name. I watched him move into the main hall, where 200 folding chairs faced a podium draped in flags, and where, off to the right side, my coffee tables waited under the warm catering lights. And that's when he saw her. I didn't catch it at first because I was watching the crowd, but the room changed. You know how a space can go wrong before you can name what's wrong with it. How the sound of 200 people murmuring can shift a quarter tone, and suddenly your skin knows something your brain hasn't caught up to. That. The general had stopped walking. He'd stopped dead in the middle of the open floor, mid-stride, one foot still slightly ahead of the other, frozen. His aide, a sharp young major who'd been half a step behind him all night, overshot, and had to turn around, confused, hand half raised like he wasn't sure if he should touch the old man or not. The general was looking at the woman by the coffee urns. And she was looking back at him. She had a white cup in her good hand, lifted halfway to a saucer, and it had stopped there in the air. Her face, both sides of it, the smooth and the scarred, had gone completely still. Nobody else understood yet. The band kept sawing away at their 8 bars, blissfully clueless. Somewhere a senator laughed at his own joke. Tavar, by the dessert cart, leaned in to whisper something to the ponytail girl, probably another haunted house crack. The well never ran dry with that kid. But this time she elbowed him hard in the ribs and shushed him, because even she could feel the air in the room had gone tight as a held breath. The general took one step toward her. His hand was shaking. I could see it from the door, this 70-year-old three-star general's hand trembling at his side. He took another step. The major reached out again, ready to catch him. He crossed the whole length of that hall, past the senators, past the photographer who hadn't lifted his camera because he didn't understand yet that this was the only picture worth taking all night, past me at the door close enough that I could have reached out and touched his sleeve. His eyes, I saw now, were wet and getting wetter. He walked right up to the scarred woman who'd been serving coffee, the one the kids called a haunted house, and he stopped close to her, closer than strangers stand. And in a voice so low and broken that I almost lost it under the band, he said 3 words. Everybody comes home. To understand what those 3 words did to that room, what they did to me, a kid by the door who'd never bled for anything, you have to know where they came from. And I didn't, not that night. I pieced the whole thing together later, from the speech the general gave, from the unit records that got pulled out and read aloud, and most of all from an old master sergeant named Briggs, who tracked me down 6 weeks afterward and bought me coffee in a diner off the interstate and told me the rest of it. He said somebody young ought to carry the story, in case the old men who knew it forgot to pass it down before they were gone. So let me tell it the way Briggs told me, the way it actually happened, in a valley that none of us back home could have found on a map if our lives depended on it. Her name was Adeline Sloan. Everybody who served with her called her Doc. She was a flight medic, which is its own special breed of crazy, the people who climb into the helicopter and fly toward the place everyone with sense is sprinting away from. She wasn't big. Briggs said when she first showed up at the forward operating base, a couple of the infantry boys took one look at her, small, plain, quiet, and started a pool on how many weeks before she washed out and got sent home. She did not wash out. She kept to herself mostly, drank her coffee black and bitter, read paperback novels with the covers half torn off, the same ones over and over, didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't run her mouth. Briggs said you could go a whole week and not hear her string 10 words together, but she had a habit, one single habit, that drove the flight crews half crazy and kept the wounded half sane. Every single time her bird lifted off toward a casualty, every single time, no exceptions, she'd key her radio, and over the noise of the rotors she'd say the same thing to whatever bleeding, broken soldier was waiting for her down there in the dark. Even if he couldn't hear her, even if his radio was gone, even if, God forbid, he was already past hearing anything ever again. Hold on, everybody comes home. It was a promise she had absolutely no right to make. Medics aren't supposed to promise. The whole brutal lesson of the job is that you cannot save everyone, and the smart ones, the ones who survive it with their minds intact, learn early to stop saying things they can't guarantee. You don't tell a dying man he'll make it. You don't tell a mother her son's coming home if you don't know. But Doc Sloan said it every single time, and the strangest thing happened. The crews started saying it back to her, and then it stopped being just a thing she said into a radio. It became the law of her aircraft. You did not leave anyone behind. Not the living, not the wounded, not the dead, not so much as a man's boot if you could reach down and grab it on the way out. Everybody comes home. That was the rule of Doc Sloan's bird, and her crews kept it like scripture. And for 2 solid years, against every odd and every actuary table that says you can't, she kept that promise far more often than any human being had a right to. Then came the night at Outpost Terek. Briggs always set the scene the same way, like he'd told it 100 times to himself in the dark before he ever told it to me. It was the worst possible weather for flying. Low clouds sitting right down on the ridgelines, no moon, the kind of total dark where the pilots fly half on their instruments and half on raw faith, where the ground comes up at you out of nowhere. Nobody with a choice flies in that. But a patrol working out of the outpost, 12 men, light and fast, the way they liked to move, had walked straight into an ambush down in the dry riverbed below the ridge. Pinned. Wounded scattered across open ground with no cover. And the officer leading that patrol, the man who'd taken them out and now couldn't get them back, was a young battalion commander named Lieutenant Colonel Royce Hartley. The first rescue helicopter that tried to go in took heavy fire on the approach and had to peel off, one engine bleeding oil out into the night, barely limping back. After that, Command did the same thing, the by-the-book thing. They called a hold, wait for daylight, wait for the gunships and the fast movers to come up with the sun and hammer the ridge flat, and then send the medevac into a quiet valley. Everybody on that net knew what waiting for daylight meant. It meant the math. It meant that some number of those 12 men down in the wash, the ones already hit, the ones bleeding out into the sand, would not be alive to see the sun they were all supposed to wait for. Doc Sloan was not the senior person in that conversation, not even close. She was a sergeant listening to colonels make a colonel's decision. By every rule, it wasn't her call and it wasn't her place. She walked over to the pilots anyway, a married pair of warrant officers everybody called the twins, even though they weren't related and looked nothing alike. They'd just flown together so long they finished each other's checklists. Briggs said Doc Sloan stood in front of them, this small, quiet woman, and she didn't make a speech. She asked them one question. "If it was your own boy down in that wash," she said, "would you sit here and wait for the sun?" And the twins flew. They flew into a valley full of muzzle flashes with every light on the aircraft switched off, navigating by the tracers, which is to say they steered toward the gunfire because the gunfire was the only thing they could see. They found the riverbed by the streaks of fire crisscrossing it. They put that helicopter down in a stretch of dry wash barely bigger than a parking space, rotors clawing at the canyon walls. And Doc Sloan was out the door and into that riverbed while the rounds were still cracking past, and she started dragging men to the bird with her own 2 hands. She made the first run out with 5 of the wounded packed in tight. Now, and this is the part that mattered later, the part that decided everything, she did not have to get off that helicopter again. That wasn't the job. The job was load and go, load and go. You fly the wounded back to the surgeons and you fly back empty for the next load, and the grunts on the ground do the carrying. That's the system, and the system exists for a reason. It keeps the one person who can keep men alive in the air alive too. When the twins set back down in the wash for the second run, Doc Sloan got out again. The second run is where it all went wrong. There was an RPG. Briggs's voice always dropped to almost nothing when he reached this part, and he'd look down into his coffee instead of at me. The rocket-propelled grenade hit the tail of the helicopter at the exact worst moment, as it was lifting off with the last load of wounded, just light enough on the skids to be vulnerable, just heavy enough that there was no jinking out of the way. The bird slewed sideways in the air, came down hard on its flank in the riverbed with a sound Briggs said he felt in his teeth from 200 meters off, and the fuel went. It went up like a struck match. 1 second, a wounded helicopter on its side, the next a ball of fire lighting the whole canyon orange, throwing the shadows of running men huge against the rock walls. And Lieutenant Colonel Royce Hartley, who'd already been hit twice by then, who had a leg that wouldn't hold his weight, who Doc Sloan had personally loaded into that aircraft 30 seconds earlier, was still inside it, strapped into a seat, the cabin filling with fire. Everybody who could run ran, and listen, that's not cowardice, that's training, that's correct. A burning aircraft is a bomb that hasn't finished going off. The fuel cooks, the ammunition cooks, the flares and the ordnance cook, and the only survivable move, the only sane move, the move every single one of them had been drilled to make, is to get clear and stay clear and let it burn. The men running from that fire were doing exactly what they'd been trained their whole careers to do. Doc Sloan ran the other way. She ran into the fire. Briggs said the men who watched it could never agree afterward on how long she was in there. One swore it was 10 seconds. Another swore it was a full minute, and a minute inside a fire that size is not a minute, it's a geological age, it's forever. But all of them agreed on what she did. She got to the cockpit through the flames. She found Hartley still strapped in and half-conscious, and she cut his harness with the knife she kept clipped to her vest, and Briggs always pointed out that she had to do that by feel, in the smoke, with the heat already cooking the skin off her own arm. She got him by the collar of his uniform, and she dragged a 200-pound man out of a burning aircraft with her own clothes on fire, and the two of them went down together in the riverbed. And then she did the thing that took the rest of her face. The colonel's uniform was burning, so Doc Sloan rolled him under the shallow water still standing in the wash, and she covered him with her own body to smother the flames, and she kept the fire off him with her own left side. Her face, her neck, her ear, her shoulder, her arm and her hand. She used herself as the blanket. She let the fire have her so it couldn't have him. When the second medevac finally clawed its way in at the gray edge of first light, after the gunships had finally come and beaten the ridge into silence, the survivors did the count on the riverbank, the way you always do, the count that tells you how bad the night really was. 12 men from the patrol, both of the twins, the crew chief, and Doc Sloan burned past any recognition, her face wrapped in a field dressing but breathing. Briggs told me she was already going under by then, full of morphine, sliding away from the pain into the dark. And the medics working on her in the back of that second bird, men who'd flown with her, who'd heard her say it 100 times over the radio, said the last thing she got out before she lost consciousness was the only thing she ever said. Everybody comes home. And here's the part Briggs would always end on, setting his coffee down careful, like the cup was suddenly heavy. Every man who walked into that valley walked back out of it alive. All 12 of the patrol, both pilots, the crew chief, every single one, not one killed in action that whole terrible night. That had never happened. Briggs said in all his years of war he never once saw it happen again, a night that bad, that fully gone wrong, and not one empty seat on the ride home. Not before and not after. Just that once. Just her. Now here's the part that made me genuinely angry when I learned it, and I think it's going to do the same to you, so brace up. She got a medal. Of course she got a medal. You cannot pull a battalion commander out of a burning aircraft with your own body and not get a medal. The system won't allow it. They pinned it on her in the hospital in front of the cameras, while her face was still wrapped in gauze, and the doctors honestly didn't know yet whether she'd keep the eye on that side. There's a photo of it somewhere. A bandaged woman in a hospital bed, and a row of officers in clean uniforms leaning in and flashbulbs. And then the world did the thing the world always does. The cameras left. The reporters filed their stories and went looking for the next one. By the following Tuesday, a burned-up flight medic recovering in a hospital in Texas had stopped being news, and the war ground on the way wars do, swallowing the next day and the next, and after a while there was nobody left taking pictures of the woman who'd kept the promise. The recovery took 2 years. 2 years. Briggs said she went through more skin grafts than anybody bothered to count. They'd take healthy skin from her back and her thigh and lay it over the burned places and wait and watch and do it again. They rebuilt the left hand as much as a hand like that can ever be rebuilt, which, if you've ever seen it, isn't much. The fingers were gone, and that's a thing no surgeon gives back. She lost the ear for good. And for a long time afterward, Briggs said, she couldn't be anywhere near the smell of cooking, barbecues, kitchen grease, even a lit candle on a cake, because the body remembers what the mind tries to bury, and the smell of meat on a fire took her straight back into that cockpit every time. And then the Army medically retired her. That's the clean phrase. Medically retired. Sounds almost gentle, like a pension and a handshake. What it actually meant was that the thing she was, a flight medic, the best one a lot of hard men ever saw work, was finished. Over. You cannot grip a litter with a hand that's down to 3 fingers. You cannot pass a flight physical with one good eye and a pair of lungs that breathed in burning jet fuel and never fully forgave you for it. So the Army did the thing it had to do. It thanked her sincerely with more medals and a ceremony, and it processed her paperwork, and it sent her home. Except, and this is the part that got me, she didn't really have a home to be sent to. Briggs said her people were gone, or as good as gone. She'd come up out of some small town that had nothing in it for a girl like her, joined the army at 18 the first day she legally could, and the army had become the whole of her family. Her brothers were the men she flew with. Her home was wherever the unit was. And now, with every regret in the world, with medals and a pension and a firm handshake, the only family she'd ever really had was letting her go because there was no longer a place in it for what was left of her body. So she did a thing I have turned over in my mind 100 times since that night, and it gets stranger and more beautiful the more I look at it. She didn't go on the speaking circuit the way some decorated heroes do, the dinners, the keynotes, the flag behind the podium. She didn't write the book. There were people who'd have ghostwritten it for her, slapped her bandaged face on the cover. She didn't do that. And she didn't take the disability check and disappear quietly into a bottle, which would have been the easiest road in the world, and not one living soul could have blamed her for it. Instead, she moved to the town just outside the gates of Fort Caldwell, the very same fort, with the very same veterans' hospital that had spent 2 years grafting her back together one piece at a time. And she got a job in the kitchen of that hospital, the hospital where the burn patients and the amputees came to recover. Read that again, the way I had to. She took a job pouring coffee in the recovery wing. Because, and she never said this to a single soul, Briggs only worked it out himself years later, every single day, men and women came through those doors looking exactly the way she looked. Young, wrecked, terrified, catching sight of their own new faces in a window or a polished tray for the first time and quietly deciding behind their eyes that their lives were finished, that nobody would ever look at them again without flinching, that they were done. And there, in that wing, on the morning shift, there would be a woman pouring their coffee with a melted hand and half a face, calm as a Sunday morning, steady, unhurried, who would catch their eye across the room and not look away, who'd set the cup down in front of them without spilling a drop and say something plain and small like, "It's a little easier than it looks right now. Drink your coffee while it's hot." She'd been doing that for almost 16 years by the night I stood at the door and watched the general cross the floor toward her. 16 years. 16 years of coffee and quiet and being the living proof, the walking, working, breathing proof, that a person could come out the far side of the absolute worst thing that can happen to a body, and still get up in the morning, and still stand on their feet, and still pour something warm for somebody who was where she'd once been. And a couple of kids on the catering crew took one look at her and decided she'd fallen in a deep fryer, and laughed about a haunted house. I didn't know any of it that night either, so I'm not throwing stones. I'm just telling you what I'd have given later to be able to go back and stand next to her at that table and pour right alongside her, and let those kids laugh at the both of us. Now bring it all back to that bright, too loud, overlit hall and the old general standing close, too close for strangers, to the scarred woman by the coffee urns, with the tears running openly down a face like a folded map, whispering 3 words into the small space between them. "Everybody comes home." I watched her face do something I will never forget for as long as I live. It crumpled and held at the same time, that specific way a person cries when they have gotten so good over so many years, at not crying that the muscles for it have half forgotten the shape. Her good hand came up and pressed flat against her own chest, over the heart, like she was holding something in. The cup in her ruined hand, she set it down on the table, blind, not even looking, and of course it didn't spill. It never spilled. "Sir," she said, just that one word, quiet, steady even except for the very end of it. The general reached out and took her ruined left hand, that hand, the one the catering kids couldn't make themselves look at, and he held it in both of his own, gently, turning it over in his palm like it was made of something rare and breakable, which it was. He looked down at the missing fingers, at the grafted skin, smooth in the wrong places. His jaw was working hard, the muscle jumping in his cheek, and for a second I thought the old man wasn't going to be able to speak at all. "I have been looking for you," he finally got out, For 19 years. She didn't answer that. I don't think she could have. Then General Hartley turned around, still holding her hand, and he faced the room, all those colonels and senators and reporters, and the man from the governor's office. 200 people who had no idea what they were watching but had every one of them gone silent and turned toward the coffee tables because the air had told them to. The band had finally noticed. The 8 bars cut off mid-phrase with an ugly little squawk from somebody's horn, and then there was nothing. No sound at all in that whole big glass and brick hall. The general raised his voice, and it was not the cracked, broken whisper from a moment before. It was the voice of a man who had spent a career giving orders to thousands, and it filled the room without any microphone at all. "Some of you," he said, "are wondering who this is." He let that sit. 200 people held still. "This building has my name carved over the door," he said. "That is a clerical error I have been trying to correct for 2 decades, and Congress will not let me." A few people laughed, uncertain, not sure if they were allowed. He did not smile. The laughter died on its own. "This building should not have my name on it. It should have hers. Sergeant Adeline Sloan, United States Army, flight medic." I heard 200 people stop breathing at the same time. "On the 11th of March, 19 years ago," the general went on, and now he was looking out over all their heads at something only he could see. "I was bleeding out, strapped into the seat of a burning helicopter, in a dry riverbed on the other side of the world. I had 2 rounds in me and a leg that wouldn't hold. The aircraft was on fire, and I had already given the order, the correct order, the order any of you would have given for every man to get clear and leave me. And every single soldier in that valley obeyed that order. His voice caught, and he let it catch, didn't fight it. Every one of them but her. Somewhere in the rows of chairs, a woman put her hand over her mouth. She came into the fire," the general said. "She cut me out of my harness by feel in the smoke, while it was burning the skin off her own arm to do it. She dragged me clear, and when my uniform was still on fire, she put it out with her own body. She lay down on top of me in that river, and she kept the flames off me with her own left side, and that," he said, and here he turned and looked at her, openly weeping now, an old 3-star general crying in front of senators and not caring even a little. "That is why she looks the way she looks tonight. And that is the only reason that I am alive to stand inside a building with my name on it that should have had hers." He turned then, and he looked directly at the catering table, right at it, right at where Tavar and the ponytail girl were standing, frozen, a tray of untouched desserts going warm between them. I don't believe he'd heard their jokes. He'd been across the room and a war away. He didn't need to have heard them. He was talking to every person who'd ever flinched at a scar, leaned in to whisper about one, decided in half a second that a ruined face meant a ruined or lesser or stupider or weaker person underneath it. "There are men in 3 states tonight," he said, slower now, every word set down with care, "who have grandchildren because of what this woman did. 12 men walked into that valley. 12 men walked out. Every single one of us came home, and I have been a soldier my entire life, and I am telling you that does not happen. It had never happened. A night gone that wrong does not end with everyone alive." He looked back at her. "And the thing she said before she ran into that fire, she said the same thing every single time she ever flew. Every time. Whether the man on the ground could hear her or not. Everybody comes home." His voice dropped almost back to that whisper. "She kept that promise with her own skin." And then General Royce Hartley did the last thing on God's earth that anyone in that room expected. He let go of her hand. He took one step back. He drew himself up, and you could see it cost the old body something to do it, and he brought his hand up and he saluted her. A 3-star general, saluting a retired sergeant who poured the coffee. And he held it. For 1 full second nobody in that hall moved or breathed. Then a colonel in the front row stood up out of his folding chair and saluted too. Then the man next to him. Then the whole front row, scraping chairs, getting to their feet. Then it went back through the room like wind through a wheat field. everyone in uniform coming up out of their seats and saluting, and the civilians, who didn't have a salute to give, simply standing, the senators standing, the reporters lowering their cameras and standing, the man from the governor's office standing with his tie finally forgotten. 200 people on their feet in dead silence, every face turned toward one small woman in a kitchen apron who was holding her own chest with her good hand and trying, and failing, not to come apart. I looked over at the catering crew. Tavar had set the dessert tray down on the cart. He was standing at a clumsy, untrained civilian's version of attention, feet together, arms stiff at his sides, the only thing his body knew to do in a room full of soldiers saluting, and his face was red as a brake light, and he was staring at the floor. The ponytail girl had both hands over her face and her shoulders were shaking, and the gum was forgotten, and she was crying like something in her had been knocked loose. And I realized I was at attention too, at my post by the door, my own hand up in a salute I didn't remember deciding to give, my throat gone tight and hot, saluting a woman I'd watched get mocked 2 hours earlier and said nothing. I've thought a lot about who that salute was really for. I think it was for her mostly. But I think a little of it, the part that came up out of me without my permission, was an apology. You'd think that would be the end of it. The big speech. The salute that swept the whole room to its feet. The music swelling, except the band had the good sense for once not to play. Roll the credits, fade to black, everyone goes home moved. But the part that has stayed with me the longest, the part I actually drove out to that diner 6 weeks later hopping Briggs could explain, came after. After the noise. After the photographers finally remembered their jobs and got the shots that ran in the papers the next morning. After somebody had hurried over with a folding chair and set it behind her because they could see her legs had gone unsteady under her. Adeline Sloan didn't take the chair. She waved it off, polite but firm, the way she'd waved off the jokes without drama, like the offer had simply passed through her. And when the general asked her, gently, openly, right there in front of everyone, because by then there was no part of this that was private anymore, why she had never come forward, why she had spent 16 years pouring coffee in a recovery wing 3 buildings away from his office and never once walked over and knocked on his door and said, "It's me, I'm the one, I'm still here." She gave an answer that I have carried in my chest ever since, and that I'll carry till I'm in the ground. She said, "Because the men I work with in the mornings don't need a hero, sir." She said it quietly, and the quiet room leaned in to hear it. They've got plenty of heroes, posters of heroes, heroes on the wall in the lobby. What they need, she said, is somebody who already walked the road they're scared to death of and came out the other side and is standing right in front of them holding a coffee pot. A medal doesn't help them. A medal just tells them what I did once. She lifted her ruined hand a little, looked at it without any shame at all. A scar tells them what they can survive. And then she said the thing I really came all this way to tell you. There was a young soldier in the front row that night. A kid, younger than me, even, which is saying something, in a wheelchair, both legs gone below the knee, so new to the recovery wing that you could still see it in his eyes, that he hadn't yet decided whether he was going to keep living the hard way that was left to him, or just stop trying. Anyone who spent time around the freshly wounded knows that look. He'd been wheeled in for the ceremony, parked at the end of the front row, and through the whole thing he'd been staring at Adeline Sloan like she was the first thing in months that had made any sense to him at all. She saw him, of course she saw him. 16 years on that shift, seeing him was the whole job. She walked over to him, past the general, past the colonels, through the parted crowd, and she got down on the floor in front of his chair so they were level. And that couldn't have been easy, kneeling, not with what the fire had done to her legs all those years ago. But she did it without a wince. She took his hand in her 7 fingers, and she did not say anything grand. No speech. Nothing about valor or sacrifice or the 11th of March. She said the same plain, small thing she'd been saying every morning for 16 years to every frightened, wrecked, newly broken kid who came through her wing. It's a little easier than it looks right now. And then she tipped her head, just slightly, at the whole packed, weeping, standing room hall behind her. The colonels and the senators and the general and the cameras and the 200 people on their feet, every one of them turned toward the two soldiers on the floor. "And look," she said to him, gentle, "everybody came back for you." The kid broke, just put his face down into his free hand and shook, all of him, the way you cry when something you'd given up on turns out to have been true the whole time. And she held his other hand in her ruined one and she let him do it. Didn't shush him, didn't rush him, didn't tell him it was okay. Just knelt there on the floor and held on, the way she'd probably held 100 shaking hands before his, in mornings nobody ever wrote down. The Hartley wing got a second name that spring. They couldn't take the general's name off the building. That was carved in stone over the door, literally, and he'd long since given up that fight. So instead they took the burn-and amputee recovery ward inside it, the ward where she'd worked the morning shift for 16 years, and they named it the Sloan Unit. There's a plaque by the door. I went and stood in front of it once on a trip back through, just to see it for myself. It doesn't have a medal citation on it. She wouldn't allow it. Briggs told me she put her foot down on that and didn't budge. It doesn't list the valley or the date or the burning helicopter. It just has her name and her rank, and underneath that, in plain block letters, the 3 words, "Everybody comes home." And she kept working the kitchen, by the way. That's maybe the part that gets me most of all. After the speech and the salute and the plaque and the photos in the paper, after every reporter in the state suddenly wanted the interview she'd avoided for 19 years, she turned all of it down. Every speaking offer, every book deal, every camera. And the next morning she put her apron back on and went back to the morning shift, and last I heard she's still there, still pouring, still catching the eye of every scared new arrival across the room, still, after everything, refusing to look away. I think about Adeline Sloan more than I think about almost anyone I ever served with. And it isn't really the fire, though, God, the fire. It isn't the one impossible minute in the burning aircraft. It's the 16 quiet years that came after it. The ones with no cameras and no general and no salutes and no plaque, when nobody at all was watching. And she got up every single ordinary morning and tied on an apron and went and stood in a room where the broken people could see her. And she stayed. For strangers. For kids who'd never know her name or her medal or the 11th of March. Morning after morning after morning. Because here's what I believe now that I didn't believe at 23 by that door. Almost anyone can be brave for 1 minute. Put enough fear and enough love behind a person, and most of us, I truly think, could run into the fire 1 time. The body will do astonishing things in 1 terrible minute. But to be brave for 16 years of ordinary mornings, with a coffee pot and a ruined hand, for people who can never repay it and will mostly never know what you gave. That's the kind they don't strike medals for. That's the kind nobody crosses a room to whisper about. And it's the only kind, I've come to think, that really stays. So the next time you pass somebody carrying scars, the kind that make a whole bright room go quiet, the kind that make the careless kids lean in to whisper, do me one favor, the favor I didn't do that night and have wished 1,000 times I had. Don't look away, and don't lean in to whisper either. Just nod. You never know which one of them walked all the way into the fire, so that somebody else could come home.